Thank you so much for having us here. As was said, I've run Edible Cleveland for 7 years, and there are not enough opportunities to talk about this issue with communities beyond those who are just local food champions. We end up talking to ourselves about a lot of this. And so first and foremost, I want to thank the committee and Catherine Falls and everyone for thinking of this topic and inviting us to be here. I am so honored to be with this panel, very big panel, so we're not going to have everyone answering every question. And we also are going to make sure that there's time reserved at the end for you guys to ask some questions. I brought some along, and then we'll turn the conversation to you as well. So I'm mostly timekeeper and making sure everyone engages, and we hope that you'll be a part of the conversation like I've gotten very used to at the City Club. Let me start, though, by introducing everyone who's on the panel so you have a sense of who they are, and then I have kind of a starter question to get them going. So I am possibly going in the order that's here. We'll see. Okay. Mary Holmes, I have known since I first thought about starting Edible Cleveland. She was one of the first people I was introduced to. She's a Harvard Business graduate and has worked in manufacturing systems, created a business consulting firm in 1988, which conducted market research for nonprofits and strategic planning for many organizations. She co-founded the North Union Farmers Market, which many of you may know, in 1995, and became a SAGES Fellow at Case Western Reserve University. She taught an undergraduate seminar entitled Food, Farming, and Economic Prosperity for 10 years. And that was, boy, she was like my professor, teaching me all kinds of things as I was starting Edible Cleveland. As you heard, she's currently chapter leader for Slow Food Cleveland, and she's a certified master gardener. So that is Mary Holmes, who is with us today. Abbi Turner, I met before either of us were in local food. Actually, we were both in public radio back when we first met, but then had the pleasure of having a story about her wonderful farm in Edible Cleveland. She's a motivational farmer at Lucky Penny Creamery, where fresh goat's milk is handcrafted into artisan cheese, goat yogurt, and best of all, award-winning candy. As a seasoned entrepreneur, Turner is recognized as a leader in the urban farming, sustainable grazing, and women in agriculture movement. Her current projects include, and here's a list, Earth Angel Farm Urban Shepherding, Recycle Pots and Pans, Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, and promoting her soon-to-be-released book, which I'm very excited about, The Land of Milk and Money, Lessons Learned by Business Earned from Ohio's Women in Dairy, which will be awesome and is coming out next week or very soon. She spends her day at the farm with her chickens, pigs, and goats, and happiest when she's wearing her muck boots and drinking coffee. Thankfully, we got her to stop doing that a little today and come and join us. So thank you, Abbi, for being here. Mario. Okay, I love Mario's story. I am so happy that you're here. He is one of those guys that works at Heinen's. You know, Heinen's is a family business, but he defines what family means at Heinen's. He's been there 37 years and started working there at the age of 15 when his dad, Rico, was the director of produce. So this guy knows everything and anything you want to know about produce buying and those partnerships here in Northeast Ohio. He says his father taught him everything he needed to know about produce, and he worked his way through the company from stocker to produce manager, and now as produce buyer, he purchases products from our growers, local, domestic, and abroad, with the highest quality standards in the industry in our stores. They currently carry over 400 varieties of fruits and vegetables, so I challenge you to buy a few you don't know the next time you go to Heinen's, 150 of which are certified organic. Much of the produce is found through a decades-long commitment that they have to supporting local farmers and growers, and I can stand by that. We've actually followed some of their buyers out to Amish country, do an incredible job of producing and collecting great food, and they're turning 90 this year, so that's a great celebration. So Mario, thanks for being here. John, you're up next, right? All right, let's see. What do I have here for you? John grew up on a family farm in Burton, Ohio, among let's say that louder. All right, Burton. 30 acres of corn, soybeans, and greenhouses. His father started the Burton Floral and Garden, Midwest's largest horticulture and supply distributor, and his father worked there. He successfully ran the greenhouse operation for 6 years, and in 2008, Greenhouse Grower magazine called him one to watch for his progressive approach to production and sustainable energy. Cranes Cleveland also made him one of the 40 under 40 in the class of 2009. In 2011, he left the family business to start a new kind of hydroponic growing operation. With all of his innovation and his hard work, we now have Great Lakes Growers Company, which we know and love, and I love having your product so easily available in the stores. I can buy local without even having to think about it, which is really awesome. And finally, Bryan, you work at one of my favorite places.
I don't have any beer.
I know you don't have any beer. It's lunchtime. We don't, we have you guys as a sponsor at the City Club, and we always joke, there's no beer at the forum, but, there will be beer on the weekend of June 21st, 22nd, when the Burning River Festival happens. How's that for a promo? There you go. He's currently the executive chef, because we needed a chef on this panel. Everyone's like, can't do this panel without a chef. At Great Lakes Brewing Company, he's worked in the industry, both local and abroad, for 25 years, and has worked on almost everything in the industry, but in doing that, observed the excessive waste and damaging practices of the food service industry. He now really enjoys working in the context of a company that aggressively pursues sustainability and ethical sourcing, which is very, very true. So a round of applause quickly for all of these great panelists that we have. You are all so beautiful. And I've got the softball to get you started, but also a really important question, because sometimes people jump right into this conversation about local food. Now, I could actually challenge you to define food too, because some of us up here have very strong opinions about that, but not defining local and what local really means. And it can mean different things to different industries. So for this first question, I would really love to hear from everyone on the panel in terms of your definition of local food and why that's particularly important for people to understand. Mary, do you think you might get us started there at the end?
Is this on? I guess It is. Okay. Well, I take a little bit of a different approach to the idea of local food, and I don't focus so much on distance. What I focus on is how the food is actually produced. Of course, if it's produced in a very sustainable way in California and then shipped to Ohio, that's not local food. But the important thing about the local food movement, as we have seen in Ohio over the last 20, 25 years, is that the people who are selling at farmers markets, who are now identified at Heinen's as local farmers, they are close, but they are also growing products or producing meat or dairy products in a very different way than industrial food production. So I'll stop at that. I'd like to come back and talk about industrial versus local. We can call it sustainable if you want. Some people are now calling it regenerative agriculture, which is a very challenging thing to do. But it's about the quality, the goodness, the nutrition that is in the food because of the way it's produced.
When Mary speaks, I'm reminded why I love and respect her so much. So I also approach local foods in a different way based upon methods of production. Many people say it's 300 miles, that's your local food shed. Well, if the people are producing manner that protects the soil and the water, that's important to me too. I'm often asked, well, what do you think, local or organic? And at that point, my answer is thank you for taking the time to actually think about that question and giving consideration to the food that you eat and what you feed your families.
When I think about local, I think there's a few things. You're looking at local being Ohio, not being from other states, sustainably grown, which I would agree, on that side. We also have local organics, and people do say a lot of times that local trumps the organic side of it because a lot of the local farmers are sustainably growing and only spot spraying if an issue comes up. So they are really just doing as little spraying as possible when you look at it, instead of commercially growing, on hundreds and hundreds of acres. But also I think about not just buying local products, meat, produce, and things like that, but supporting your local stores and restaurants and people that are in your community no matter which community you live in, to help them thrive and keep going and keep them in business. And I think that's also a great part of being local.
Yeah, I would agree with Mario. For me, it's a big part of it. Distance for us is what's important. We harvest everything early in the morning, and we're shipping everything the next day. So, the furthest distance that we'll ship stuff from Northeast Ohio here is maybe, we've shipped as far as Toronto, South Dakota, but generally speaking, we're 250 miles or so. And we don't have any aspirations of getting a wider base than that. But again, the biggest benefit to local is, I think about my employees. When I started, I had one employee. I've got 35 employees now. They're all local community members. A lot of them are young kids that didn't go to college, didn't have that education where they could go have a different kind of opportunity. So we're empowering these younger people. They love working there. They take pride in what they're doing. They know that what they're producing, it's done in a sustainable fashion, no chemicals, pesticides, and we're delivering just the freshest stuff we can to the region. So that whole piece right there is kind of the fun part for me and why I enjoy being a part of it. So.
You don't. I'm going to give you this back.
That's not just
For me, localization is and I don't mean to diminish anything that was said. It's a different concept. Localization to me is a commitment that most restaurants and let's just say businesses have a difficult time committing to because of the infrastructure that's lacking, labor, processing facilities. A really good example, we work with Pine Size Farm exclusively. They grow for us out of Hale Farm. We also do Ohio City Farms, a number of other localized. We actually just switched back to McKenzie Creamery from Lake Erie. But their infrastructure is such that they can't process greens, so they don't often grow lettuces. And for us, the challenge is taking a product that would otherwise have an incredibly large processing cycle that would come clean and come ready for service and sales, and creating a structure where we're actually able to process and produce that and, use beautiful produce as well as trying to find homes for less admirable pieces of greenery. And so localization is about something that I think a lot of people don't actually commit to, and I think it's one of the challenges, and I think Mary would agree. The commitment and cost and labor and time of localization is really, really overwhelming, especially to small business. And so for me, localization is difficulty, and it is the next most important step of service.
Thank you all. That actually leads very nicely into, there are two parts of this conversation that I think are important, and everyone in this room in particular on both sides of that, which is the consumer side, the individual and how they participate, and then businesses and supporting local businesses and the challenges that businesses like this face. So I want to start on the consumer side and then move into the business side. And one of the things that I always hear, I'd probably hear it from this audience if I threw it out there as a question. Like, what are one of the reasons you don't buy local? Just shout out one of the reasons. Anyone?
Not available.
Not available? What's another one? More expensive, right. So available is around distribution, which we'll talk about. Expensive to me is really interesting because the more I've learned, we don't spend money on food. Part of what has happened in Americans spend less than any other developed country on food as part of their budget. 10%, I think, which is down from 17.5% in 1960. So what we are trying to do is get more for less, right? And when you go in, you look at that. Can I buy in bulk? Can I get this? Then will it last? Will it go bad? Can I use the whole thing? Will my family eat it for a month? There are all kinds of savings that we're looking for that aren't also about the nutrition and the other parts that are brought into this. So my question to whoever wants to answer it is on the consumer side, understanding why is it expensive? So down to the basics of why is local food, quote, expensive, or is it? Is there another way of looking at that bottom line and understanding what the cost is when you're not eating local?
I could take it for the grocery store side of it. It's really not expensive. It might be expensive at the beginning of seasons, as they begin in a particular season, like now things are getting going. We have some local products in the store now, and they're not expensive. I mean, they're a little expensive right now, but that will come down. And those products, whether it's tomatoes, zucchini, lettuces, all that will be pretty inexpensive through the summer. And we have so much of it. We pay the fair price to the farmers. We work on the price with them. What they need is what we'll give them. Some other areas might be a little bit more expensive because the farming is even more difficult, and that would be more of the greenhouse grown products that are grown in Ohio. Some of that is a little more expensive, but it lasts longer. It has less pesticides. Any of the greenhouse product is very healthy and sustainable.
I'm going to shift industries here. I think that you're absolutely right, because in the context of what you're doing with Heinen's is still working with, and I don't want to say large growers in a negative fashion, but farms that are 70, 80, 200 acres. I mean, they're doing responsible, sustainable growth, but we're also talking about farmers who specifically work for commercial and retail. A lot of restaurants challenge themselves, and this is what I mean by a lack of infrastructure, by working with smaller companies like OCF, Hale Farms. There's several more growing up in Ohio City right now. And they simply can't produce the bulk, so they're not making pennies on the plant 1,000 times a day. They're doing a couple deliveries a day, and so many of them subsidized with refugee response, with volunteer programs that have crop share alliances, et cetera. But at the end of the day, they do need money to continue functioning, and so those costs translate into higher restaurant product pricing, straight up. And so, Great Lakes, one of our other facets is that we have a fairly responsible compensation. Benefits are available. My dishwasher has health insurance, if that tells you anything. And so finding margin and room for these extra costs, and I'd say roughly 65 to 70% of my vendor list is localized. That sounds incredible, but it's actually quite true. And so finding margins and money to actually work and do this and make a profit is incredibly challenging, because by nature of what we're doing, we're sourcing from small farms that can only produce so much per year. And so we do see a difference in cost versus somebody like Heinen's. It's not even about purchasing power or different ethicality. It's simply just we're trying to source and sustain these smaller growers that Heinen's couldn't use, because we're talking about a scale of product usage that they can't possibly consistently meet. So there's different industries and different people committed to supporting different types of farms, so you will see a different scale and cost everywhere.
I'd just like to add a couple of things that relate to the availability as well as the cost. One of the reasons we decided to start the farmers market in 1995, before some of you were even born, is that the local product, take a strawberry for example. Now, strawberries are ripe in June in Ohio. You can go to the store and you can get strawberries from California all year round. You don't really want to eat them. I mean, I don't. Because there are a lot of reasons, but mainly they're terrible. And I used to drive to Ann Arbor to a farmer's market to get my strawberries to make strawberry jam. I know the difference between a homegrown ripe tomato, or strawberry, sorry. So that was part of the motivation. What you're buying from a local farmer, whether it's at a farmer's market or if you join a CSA. Anybody a member of a CSA here? Does anybody know what a CSA is? Good. So it stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And there are several ways of doing that now in Northeast Ohio. There are some group buying organizations that aren't true CSAs. One of those has 3,000 members. They pay up front for a subscription. They get produce every week, and not just produce, but dairy and meat from probably about 50 to 75 different farms. So the person who runs this is collecting local product. But they're getting a product that unless you go to Heinen's, you can't get in the store. It's just not the same quality. It's not the same nutrition. So there's a couple of things to weigh when you think about the price. If it's higher, is it worth it? For me, I would say yes. I'd eat less of something delicious and fresh than a bag of something. There is accessibility. There are CSAs all over the place now. You can sign up for an individual farm CSA, or you can do one like the one I mentioned. And there are farmers markets a lot of places. And you're just not going to get the same quality product in a grocery store.
Well, and that's been a lot of the foodie movement, when you hear about it, is about eating less and eating higher quality. The movement to eat less meat, but to choose your meat wisely, so that you're not cutting things out or making a judgment necessarily about what other people might like or a certain dietary style, but just consuming less and thinking about putting the right things on your plate instead of a lot on your plate, which for me is sometimes hard to do because I do like to put a lot on my plate. And I think another piece that comes up that you mentioned was a CSA, and what I wanted to get into a little bit was even getting started, some of these farms, and how hard it is. That CSA structure was designed to help farmers. I know you were saying at Great Lakes you actually do order some products that then you'll buy from some farms. Is that correct? So there are ways in micro decisions to help farms get started. But can we talk a little bit about the challenge for these businesses in finding investment and even being able to get off the ground?
Abby?
So I'm going to go back to one earlier point, and I'll speak for small producers. It's very hard for us to hit an economy of scale. You know, I'm competing against, companies that have fleets of trucks and teams of, sales teams, and they have a lot of infrastructure that, as a small producer that makes about 7,000 pounds of cheese a year, that's very hard for us to do. And one of the challenges that we face in servicing bigger clientele like grocery stores or established restaurants that churn through a lot of plates is we really could benefit from aggregation and distribution. So where a number of small farms get together, they'll share trucking, they'll share warehouse space, and Steve Corsa right up here, who's at the front table, is working on a project right now that would help small farmers in this area with aggregation and distribution. Financing. So one of the challenges that we also face as small farmers and small business is how do we put it all together? We had the unfortunate timing to try to launch during the economic recession. 2009, everything was crashing, banks were falling apart, and I had 150 pregnant goats. Okay, so our raw material was on order, and I couldn't send it back. All right. So we went to 11 banks. They're like, nobody eats goat cheese. Why would we do this? And we were left kind of holding the bag to go, okay, how do we put this together? And it ended up coming together over a period of 2 years with about 33 individuals, people that made investment in our infrastructure, equipment, whether they've been buying things for us or leasing things or short-term loans. And this was all crafted as something called a part of slow money, which is a people investing in food and farms as if they truly matter. The returns are lower and they're longer, but you can have the satisfaction of knowing that you're actually helping someone in your community keep your dollars back in that community. So our business was built 10 years ago with investment from family, friends, and then some complete strangers. It's kind of funny. A guy in my prior life, Noelle and I know each other from fundraising, and I actually had a guy work with me, and I let him go. And the job wasn't right for him, and we agreed. And he called back a couple years later, and he said, oh, I understand that you're looking for investment. And, I want to invest in my community, and it's the end of a great story that they've been wonderful partners all along the way. So there's other things, crowdfunding, Kickstarter, it's kind of a patchwork quilt. The important thing is that you're all change makers in this audience, that you, as leaders in the community, go and support the farmers markets and going to the local restaurants and grocers that actually are making this commitment to buying local food because it is harder for them. So.
Yeah, so I started my business, 2011 or 2012, and I agree with Abby. It was challenging. We were very small, little 300 square foot greenhouse. Went to Home Depot, bought a bunch of pieces, parts, pumps, filters, put some seeds in, and started selling lettuce to Rick's Cafe in Chagrin. So obviously, it was apparent that if we don't get some level of scale and some level of automation, we weren't going to make money, and we're never going to be able to service customers. So I personally took on a business partner, and I don't want to couch the partner as an angel investor, but he's one of my best friends and was interested in the whole concept of what we were doing. was interested in making a return, but that wasn't the primary reason that the guy wanted to get involved. And it wasn't his primary goal to run the place every day. That was my job. So we also went out and sought the Geauga County's Economic Development Department and got a subordinated loan that helped us get our first loan for the first, acre of greenhouse we built. So there's ways where there's a will, there's a way, for sure. But it is hard. I made the commitment a few years ago. We have to have some level of scale to be able to have a sustainable business, and that does take investment. And I think local economic development type committees and groups could do a lot to help this whole kickstart all this stuff getting going if they would appropriate some money towards this. So I think that would help me. So.
Do you want to talk about your relationship with the farm at all? How you guys do that? Do you do any pre-orders at all?
Yeah, and so for us, I'm going to break my chair up here. Wow, I'm strong. So for us, particularly with Hale Farm, Ohio City Farm is one of our largest vendors come summer and fall harvest time. Hale Farm itself exclusively serves to us, and I have the opportunity and frankly the privilege of working with some very intelligent, very creative farmers who are doing a lot of great growth techniques. And I think that's really taking the forefront of that industry right now is how to grow, not where to grow. But for us, I get to sit down and seed catalog, and ironically, before I came on, the year I came on, the harvest came in, and I had just come in July, and I saw 7,000 bags of shishito peppers and bok choy. And I couldn't understand why the living hell anybody ordered that much of that particular product. And the previous chef just didn't have quite the same interest, and so they just kind of threw out whatever they felt like growing. I think they were doing some test products. But this year in particular, I had the opportunity to sit down and plan out and map effectively my entire summer, fall, and early winter menu based on what they're growing out of these things. And so I think it's an example of just, again, that commitment. If you're going to start a business at your smaller scale, you have to find people willing to support you, whether that's monetarily, whether that's in terms of just getting the job done, sitting down, paperwork, planning, everything. Volunteers, I think, are very, very important. But for me, the commitment is in sitting down and ensuring that we're providing an avenue for these farms to fully utilize their product, and we're not sending things back going, I can't really buy that, I don't have a use. So on either side of the fence, you have to put in the time and the effort.
Mary, you had mentioned earlier something you wanted to get back to in terms of agricultural shifts that are happening. You had said, I want to talk more about this. So I just wanted to see if in this space, are there things that are happening in the ways people are farming that we should be paying attention to and can support, particularly in urban communities where we aren't right next to the farm. We don't know what those strategies are, but we're important consumers.
Well, somebody mentioned earlier about technology. I think you mentioned. There's definitely technology coming to the smaller farms. Unfortunately, in the 50s, we made a big commitment to get big or get out. Some of you may remember that particular Secretary of Agriculture who bought into the whole industrial idea that food could be produced on enormous farms with just, one type of product with lots of machinery and pesticides and artificial fertilizers and so forth. And we've seen that even in Ohio, we have half of our farmland still growing corn and soybeans, which is not food, by the way. Those are industrial inputs. But what we are seeing now is that smaller farms are finding ways to actually be successful, economically successful, and even urban gardens. Urban, maybe they call them farms, like Ohio City Farm. But they can only be successful if they're growing good food that people are willing to buy, one way or another, through, as I said, CSA or in a restaurant or in Heinen's when they've got their stands up. So technology will continue to make a difference and hopefully be more focused on smaller farms. Robotics is one, believe it or not, that is coming along and will allow for fruit picking and some of the really difficult labor-intensive farming that, as I said, you want strawberries from Ohio, but you have to get down on your hands and knees to pick them. So hopefully that will help. I think what we're also seeing is to some extent, a revival of diversification. So we're seeing that, I don't know if you're aware that we have, I think, one of the only, if not the only national park in the country that includes farming, and that is the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. I think there are 12 farms there right now, and just had some conversation with the people who own Purple Blue Farm, and they're trying to do permaculture farming there, which involves animals as well as fruits and vegetables and insects and all kinds of things to make them all work together to produce very, very high quality eggs and fruits and vegetables. I have some statistics that I just received this morning. And the Department of Agriculture every 5 or so years does a survey. And I think there's some good news here in this result. One is that women operators on farms has increased almost 30%. So, Abby, you have many other compatriots, hopefully. The number of farms that are under 500 acres has increased, and that's definitely a counter trend to what we've been seeing. Which means for every farm, there's a farmer, even a farm family, which means that rural communities are beginning to have more people living in them. Because, when the large farms consolidated with large equipment and a lot of land became leased land, people growing corn and soybeans, there are no people out there. There are 40% more farmers seeking organic certification. And I don't know if we want to discuss organic. Maybe somebody will have a question about organic. And Ohio is the sixth in the nation in the number of certified organic farms and second in the nation in the number of acres being transitioned to organic production. I think what this means for suburban areas is there will hopefully continue to be more restaurants, more food service. I'm very eager to see schools begin to take a hard look at what we're serving our children to eat. What I have seen is abominable, and it's no wonder they can't learn anything. I don't know how many of you have actually had kids in school or you've looked at school food service, but this is a tremendous area of growth for farmers and urban gardeners and food service people. And there's a wonderful story. I'm taking too much time, but there is a wonderful story about the South Euclid schools and what they have done in bringing in food for their students. So I would urge you all to look at that.
It's definitely a place for partnership. And I think one of the other things that we've noted at Edible Cleveland, and one of the things we wanted to inspire was hearing that there was a downward trend in terms of people eating at home. And no offense to the restaurants here, but switching over to Mario and thinking about what do you see happening in terms of home cooking. Mary, you had a great quote that Wendell Berry Holmes said, eating is an agricultural act, and you said, eating is a cultural and ecological act. And I like to say when I do panels, I usually start by asking how many people voted today. And the only time I got hands up was when I was in a senior center, and I don't think they really thought, they're like, oh yeah, I vote every time. I must have voted today. Usually it's like that. What are you talking about? And then I ask, okay, how many of you had breakfast this morning? And you can raise your hand. And how many of you had lunch? Well, there you go, or a snack. Those to me are votes. So as much as we talk about how expensive or inexpensive or hard it is or easy it is to get food, every time you fill your plate, you get a vote about what's important to you. And that is completely up to you, whether that is organic food or whether that's Whole Foods or whether that's supporting someone you know the name of or whether that's flavor and what you're going for. And it can change from meal to meal. You have 3 times a day at least where you get to choose how are you going to vote with your plate. And I think that, to me, is something people could take home, but so often they're not even taking food home and preparing it there. So can you talk a little bit about, I know at Heinen's it's a particular audience, but maybe looking generally at what's happening in homes and how we can encourage more people to cook at home. And Abby, you have a cool project that you do that addresses some of those challenges too.
So you want me to answer?
Sure.
Yeah, we see that trend is going down. I mean, you can tell in what you're selling and how often people are grabbing it. And I think people over the years have just been so on the go that I'm going to go just grab something to eat, or even if it's a nice restaurant where they're going to go and sit for an hour and a half or two. They're not cooking. A lot of homes and families and younger families, they're just not cooking things, you know. So it's harder for them, I believe, to grab some fresh products, whether it's fish, seafood, produce, no matter what it is, and have confidence really to do that cooking and do it well, to where they feel that, hey, you know, I can do this. So I think some of that is they need to be shown how simple some of it is. Some of it's pretty easy. You can cook things in certain ways, and it's very good for you. I mean, other than that, I don't, you know, things are changing so drastically in my industry right now, just with all of online ordering and so many places opening up around us and competition, and it's just changing very quickly and not stopping. So I think it was Bryan who said earlier to us while we were talking, and he's looking at how many restaurants and places there are to eat just right here around the corner, all crammed into one little place. And, you know, why do we need so many of those places right there and just all crammed in together? And, you know, it's us as consumers are pretty much demanding it, or else they wouldn't survive if we weren't buying it from them. So I think the choices we make, as Noelle said, is going to, it makes a difference to all of us and to every local person, anybody you're buying from. Your choice helps us decide what we need to do.
Sure. Mario mentioned that one of the challenges that people weren't cooking at home. And that's for a variety of reasons. It's convenience, it's time, it's, you know, soccer practice, whatever it is. Well, we realized early on as food producers that there's many problems in the food system, and we can't tackle them all at lunch today. But one of the challenges that we recognized was in making sure that the children and families are fed. You know, we talk about school lunch programs. For many kids, that's the only meal that they get that day. It better be balanced. Food banks are doing a wonderful job of distributing food to families in need. We have, you know, exceptional food banks here in Cleveland. Mid-Ohio gave 69 million pounds of food out last year. What we recognized that one of the challenges was that the food was going home and people didn't have the means or the tools to cook with it, okay? So 8 years ago, as a sister company, we started something called Recycle Pots and Pans. And what we do is we collect and aggregate pots and pans to redistribute to families in need so those things can be cooked. We're a completely volunteer, and it's our way as food producers, it's our way of service to community to make sure that all people, regardless of socioeconomic condition, have healthy, nutritious, local food.
I just wanted to add one thing because Noelle mentioned that I'm the chapter leader of Slow Food Cleveland. And most people say, does that mean slow crock pot? No, it's slow food versus fast food. And slow food encourages people to cook and eat together and enjoy the food and enjoy each other. And there's a certain aspect of that eating at home. You can pretty much prepare anything you want with a frying pan and a pot. You don't need all kinds of fancy equipment. If you buy fresh local ingredients, you can enjoy a great time, and maybe a bottle of wine with it or some beer. It's about a life choice. And I think we're often forgetting what joy that can give us and the benefits to a family. So add that.
Just very briefly, and it was kind of touched upon earlier, but contrary to what you might think, I actually wish the restaurant industry would collapse, frankly. It's a glut market. They actually had a roundtable 2 years ago with Michael Simon, so on and so forth, discussing the very pertinent question, do we have too many restaurants? And the obvious answer is, of course. We have a challenge right now in labor staffing because there's so few talented and long-term experience workers in the industry with a massive amount of places to work. And I think one of the more endemic issues is price points and cost. And we've created let's say 40-year, probably, a 40-year culture paradigm where going out to eat is not only a right, it's an expectation, it's convenience, it's affordable, it's not a luxury, and it should be. If you're going down to eat, you should be paying a profit margin that is rewarding restaurants and industries that are selling sustainable products that have a higher price point where necessary. When you go out to eat, it should be a selection. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend I don't take my children to Bob Evans. I hate it. We do go. You can ask my wife. I understand that there are truths, but when I circle back around to the concept of commitment for localization, I'm talking about on a personal level. If you are somebody who eats McDonald's every day, and I'm not going to say every day, but if you're eating fast food and you're eating out, if you're trying to make a commitment, this matters to you, ask yourself, what about the structure of your own life has put you in a place where you can no longer afford to make time to cook? Why are you depriving yourself of that simple act, that skill set, and the health and nutrition that follows it? And can you reasonably make a lifestyle change in order to accommodate that need? It's not just about eating locally. It's about not eating out sometimes. It's about taking the time to go to a farmer's market. It's about making choices that are fundamentally maybe more difficult for you, but lead to an ultimately better lifestyle in the long run.
Thank you. Wow, I'm loving these guys. All right, so now we turn to you and any of the questions you might have. I have a couple more if you're shy, but I know this is part of a conversation. So yes, do you want to start?
So my name is Patrice Blakemore. I'm director of the 10,000 Small Businesses Program. So it's a 3-month accelerator that helps small businesses accelerate their growth. And we've had a lot of restaurants that come through our program. So I guess my question is on the business side, what are you able to do so that your price point, to what you're saying, is what it needs to be so that you can turn a profit? Because revenue is great, but profit is what really matters in the long run.
And so this is something I spoke to Noelle in email about before we started this. It's not really just on the restaurant. There's a community aspect that I think is often overlooked, and customers are kind of robbed of their responsibility and the education of price points. Again, when you go out, if you're ordering a $12 chicken sandwich, you're part of the problem. And if you're opening a restaurant, you're trying to meet the needs of localization, sustainability, organic foods, humanely grown chickens, et cetera, you have to be willing to set a price point. And along with this comes proper investing and using capital properly, making wise, conscious choices about how you're operating on the business end. But you have to be willing to set a price point, firmly stay there, and not get into this damn Olive Garden, whatever all 6 of these restaurants are, that we're competing. Here's my coupon. I'm on. If you're on Groupon in the first year of your restaurant, close your door. Jump out the window, absolve yourself of the debt you're about to eat. Bottom line, you have to be willing to create an expectation of the cost of responsible restaurant ownership and consumerism, and stay there. And until people stick to that as an aggregate, you're going to see the same challenges. You're going to see 10% of restaurants surviving because most of them do what you're saying. They open up, they don't know how, and they don't know why. And another part of the problem is maybe just say don't. I'm opening a restaurant. Don't. Just stop. So that's it.
I'm going into movies, don't. The other thing I'll say that we have found from our readership is that people will spend more money on something they know the story about or that they know a person connected to. So in those small businesses and in those restaurants, if they're opening in a community where they are part of the community, you see this all the time, where they effectively participate in their community in places like this and our partner, they do much better because people are willing to spend that higher price point to support a person they know or a story they know behind a product. So that would be one of the things that I would also say. Yeah, she wants to say, and then you can.
I just want to say, Bryan, I wish I would have heard you 5 years ago, because I did open a restaurant, and it was open for about 2 years. I learned a lot, and for our breakfast menu, people would say, well, you know, I can get this for $5.99 at Applebee's.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, first go, okay? But secondly, it's like, I know the name of everything on your plate.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, and I think I side-skirted your question a little bit, if you're trying to make this work, the number one advice I would give, and this is in any industry, my wife and I made this mistake. We pushed through a restaurant. We had to close it with a number of outside influences and inside. Find a mentor. Don't open an industry, a business, if you don't have connections and experience or someone who can walk you through pitfalls you don't have to walk into, frankly. So mentorship, knowing the industry you're getting into, particularly the restaurant, because there's a million ways to die and only a couple ways to survive.
Headline. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes.
I'm Howard back for these opportunities. How do you control your shrinkage? That can be a nightmare. And like Heinen's, I mean, how do you know at the end of the day, if you have this much left, what's your biggest nightmare?
Well,
Can you grab the mic? Thanks.
there's more than one. Because as a buyer, and we have a couple buyers, we have three of us, that we were purchasing products from everywhere, across the country, out of the country, in Ohio. So if we don't purchase the right amount, and you have to bring that stuff across country, it takes 4 or 5 days sometimes. So if I bring in this many cases of something and stores didn't pull it all, they didn't order it all from me, well, there's going to be some shrink there because I have to now send it out to them, lower the retail, so we can at least get rid of it. I mean, we sell it to our customers and not just, throw it down the dumpster. Mr. Heinen said to me a long time ago, one of the things that always sticks in my head is that your first loss is your best loss. So if you have products that you need to move it. If you got to reduce the price, don't worry about what you're going to make on it. Get it and sell it. The other is this. So we're constantly looking at numbers and checking on what we're doing. Store level is another thing. If they're ordering, they have to try to guess what customers are going to buy each week. Weather plays a part in all of that. So we watch shrink with numbers. The stores scan that. We kind of know where we're at. But as Bryan said, this industry, his industry, profit margins are very small. I mean, in the grocery industry, it's like 1.5% is a profit margin on what you're selling. Yeah. So.
Controlling that, because you guys do a good job of.
No, for me personally, my personal compost pile just gets bigger and bigger. My wife hates all the buckets, but sorry. Frankly, we're actually kind of fortunate in that we have vendors. Hillcrest has a lot of localized people that even if all their product and their dealings aren't localized products, they're very responsible about having multiple truck days of delivery. So from my end, I run a very, very close skimming the edge of being out of things. I try not to carry too much. The only time we run into this is, frankly, it's a 30-year-old kitchen, coolers go down, and then suddenly I have an absolute ton of insurance claims and food sitting in a garbage truck. For us, it's not really that much of a challenge, and for restaurants that are ethically sourcing and keeping up with their product, it's not that big of a deal, honestly.
Yeah, I would add to that. This is where local can win and trump, and you can change the whole economic paradigm of the food system. So Mario and I were talking about this earlier, and he knows what I'm about to say. So they buy a lot of their, we sell a lot of product to Heinen's. They buy a lot of their salads from the West Coast, and he just articulated it. You got to have a crystal ball and guess right. Weather, the weather's got to be perfect. Everything's got to line up and you get one truckload of a lot of product, and they got to move it out through the week. You can't get a truckload every day of the exact same product from Fresh Express on the West Coast. If you're local, like we are, we can bring it to them every day. So we do. We're 3 to 4 days, at least 3 days a week, and they don't have to guess with our products. So we wait until all the stores place their orders at 10 a.m. today. We get the email, comes directly to us. We get it at 11 o'clock. Next morning, we get up at 5 a.m. We pack everything. We take it into their warehouse at 11 o'clock every day, and it goes out to the stores. And then we do it again the next day. And we talked about this. We charge a little bit more than what they pay from the West Coast. But that little bit more, they're shaving a shrink. I don't think you would argue that your shrink level, because of two things. One, it's fresher, and it's better for the consumer. It tastes better. It's more nutritious. It's all the things we're talking about today. And he doesn't have to be a wizard with a crystal ball to guess what he's going to need every day. So this whole local, it's why our business thrives right now, because we're able to deliver it on time, what they need, when they need it, fresher. You take it home, put it in your fridge. It doesn't go bad in 3 days because they had to push it out. So it didn't go bad on their shelf. So this is where local can really capture some of that money that, what we're talking, $400 a pallet per pallet. That's not going to a farmer or a employee on the farm. So yeah, we get paid a little more, but we're taking that money and we're paying local employees. That money goes back into the economy, and that whole thing is how it can really work. That's how it's working for our business.
All right, I got the signal a little early. I'm sorry. Oh, you had a question. I thought you were saying shut down. I was like, I thought I had 10 more minutes. All right, I'll get to you ladies in a minute. Go ahead. Yes.
Just because I've been there and I know it, and I'm not, John, you said this and I missed it, I'm sorry. Just tell us a little bit about what's so unique what you do with your farm. And I don't know if and we're going to be giving, rattling some of these off. Look, there's roots in the dirt. Tell me about that business. What is that?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. So we're growing hydroponically, which means growing in water. It's not organic. We use no chemicals, no pesticides. We recycle 100% of the water we have. From a space management, every acre of greenhouse that we build is equal to 25 acres of field production, but with a lot of other benefits, meaning 25 acres of Zellers Farms we can only use once a year. I think one turn a year. Maybe two, right? So we can put these facilities indigenous to the population, and we can deliver it fresh, on time, all the time, have a consistent employment of local people. Listen, technology, I think Mary started to hit on a little bit. It's incredible right now. It's gonna drive the cost of things out. I think one of the first things somebody said was, the cost of local is too high. It doesn't have to be too high, and it's not going to be too high in the context of using technology. And I'm talking about lighting. I'm talking about climate control. I'm talking about, to some extent, automation and robots. So we utilize all of those technologies in what we're doing. And again, what's driving our business growth is that we're able to deliver it fresher, faster, on time, high quality, better shelf life for the restaurant or for the grocer, and ultimately for the people who eat it. When they eat it, it tastes better. It's better for them, whether they know the story or not about what it's good, how good it is for the local economy. They're definitely going to recognize what's on their fork.
Hey, John, can I just ask you, how long do you think that's supposed to last in your fridge?
Which?
The lettuce
that right there. Well, we tell people, if you keep it cold, we tell people 2 weeks, but
Absolutely. I was surprised it got stuck in the back of my fridge one time, and 2 weeks later, fresh as all get out. I was so impressed with the way you package and make that available. All right, we had 2 questions over here. Yes.
So, I grew up in Western Ohio, and my very first job was working at a farm, Holmes Dairy Farm in Burton, Ohio. I know that Heinen is purchased from them. I picked strawberries and blueberries and cantaloupe, and that's a tough gig. I work alongside a lot of migrant farm workers, and I'm wondering if you've seen any problems in current political climate of employees having enough people to work local farms. And if you've seen that problem or have any comments on that.
Go ahead. Start Mario.
Absolutely. It's been going on for a long time, probably about 10, 12 years, maybe even more, where migrant farmers are, there's less of them for other reasons. There's less of them also because a lot of the growers that grow in California and some of the people we partner with, the farms we partner with, are in They go to Mexico and when the season changes, and they're using the same practices they use here. So Mexican product is not like it was and everybody was afraid of, like, 20, 25 years ago or whatever it was. But they're also, so they're staying there more for that reason, because they're able to just work there and kind of stay with their families longer. You have some that are coming here, but the strain of all the legals versus illegals and how the government has gone and singled them out it's deterring them from coming in. It's harder for them to get here, and it's just not the labor force in all these areas of the states is way down for those types of jobs. And coming in, which have started in last year, I think, the minimum wage, but I believe LET has been going up, and the laws they put together for California for minimum wage being about, I think it's going to be $16 for a picker, actually a person who picks. Again, I know it's not a lot of money, but that makes your food costs go up also. And they need to be paid fairly, but they're not going to come here. These guys are not going to hire. They're getting more and more automated. There's a berry picking machine that's out there. I knew that's where you were going. There's a strawberry picking machine out there. It's not being used yet, but they are going automated on a lot of things. I hope that helps. I mean, some guys might have some more technical.
Want to add anything real quick?
I'll just say it's sort of a double-edged sword. It's definitely a problem. The H-1 visas are way down. It's not only affecting agriculture, but for us, it's affecting the nursery business. I know of one in particular that had basically just cut their business in half, a very big nursery business. After they tried hiring college students who lasted for about a week. And so that's not going to happen. But the double-edged sword of it is that because of the issue in Mexico and California, it will actually make our fruit production more competitive. And the one thing that I just wanted to re-emphasize, in 2005, I published this report entitled Entrepreneurial Farming, part of the plan for prosperity in Northeast Ohio. And I really think that we all need to be thinking about farming, food production, local expertise, whether it's making charcuterie or specialized butchering or beautiful cheeses, not only goat, but sheep even, and so forth. These are economic development opportunities, even urban gardens for flowers. I mean, if you dip into what some people love to do, bakeries, how many of us wouldn't love to have a local bakery that's really making wonderful breads or pastries? There are a few, but go for it. There can be a lot more.
Yes, go ahead.
And we always talk about preventive medicine and eating right and exercise. Maybe we wouldn't have that many diabetes patients. And the education piece is to go out in the community and let them know about this, because this was very informative today, and I appreciate you. And I carry this message back to the community. And just letting you know, don't wait until you get high blood pressure. I'm a witness, so don't wait until you get high blood pressure to decide to change your diet. And there's always something that says about her colorful plate.
Yes.
Put some color in the plate.
Yeah.
So I just agree. Yeah.
Well, and not only that, there are more hospitals and health industries that are starting to prescribe foods, which I think is the right, I mean, it's a sad state of affairs, and we're not going to get into the whole conversation I love most right now, which is what is food. But when you have to be prescribed food, that says something about what we're really choosing to eat every day and how we're treating our food. You had a question, sir. I wanted to try to squeeze you in before we have to wrap up. Yeah.
Okay. As a consumer, we hear all the time about hormones and pesticides and all those kind of things. And as people in the business, restaurant to patronize? How do we know what grocery store to patronize?
The simple answer is call. Call, ask to speak to the chef. Don't call during lunch or dinner. And if they don't know the answer to that question, don't go to that restaurant. If they can't answer where they're sourcing, if they don't know how their chicken is grown, whether it's hormone or biotic free, make a different choice. And for me, I think the issue is to accept that there's a common ground. I think there's too much polarity in this conversation where it has to be all organic and it has to be all this. It can't be. It literally can't be. There are a certain amount of safeguards when we're talking about large-scale agriculture, whether that's farm, fish, fowl, et cetera, where these levels of hormones or pesticides are necessary for spot spraying, et cetera, and understand that there's gray areas that are healthy. And so don't create a context for yourself where you're saying, I don't eat there because I will never, ever do this thing. Understand that your own education can be fairly limited, and you should seek to educate yourself on where you're getting those products and where they are as well.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that? You want to say?
I was going to speak a little bit more about greenhouse grown, like with John's products and any greenhouse product we buy, whether it's tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuces, no matter strawberry soon. We've actually had some. We had some Ohio strawberries last month out of a greenhouse here in Ohio, and they use. They don't use pesticides. I mean, they're using integrated pest control, and this has been like that for as long as I can remember, John. I mean, on the greenhouse, yeah. So on the greenhouse side, it's integrated. They integrated pests, so pests that eat other pests, and it's so if you know where your products are coming from, you're going to understand that. And yes, there's a lot of organic product out there. We buy a lot of organic. As Noelle said, we have over 150 items in our department. People don't think we have that much, but we really do. And we have local organic and organic from everywhere else. But pesticides, as far as that goes, they are using, it costs a lot more money to use pesticides nowadays than it did. And we try to source the farmers and growers, even on the large scale. Yes, they're using them, but we try to source the growers that we feel are trying to be more sustainable and growing and using better practices. And that's what Heinen's is about.
Yeah. So I will just remind, because I think it's a challenge for everybody, that there are chances throughout your daily life and the week to make choices that are strong choices, and sometimes where that's going to be very hard to do, and give yourself the space to do that day by day. I want to ask a quick question to wrap us up, because we have to wrap up. So this is a speed round, you guys. This means maybe you can say more than one word. Absolutely you can, but be very brief. And I know that we've talked about some heavy things, so I want to talk very quickly about what you think the next generation is getting right about food. So super brief. Each of you get, a few seconds. I'll start so you can think, since this was going to be a longer answer question. And I will say, Steve Corso actually was a part of this here in the front. When we did a story on what is edible at Edible Cleveland, one of the stories was on insects and eating insects. And watching my son eat a mealworm without fear and with curiosity, and understand that, I'll be honest with you, we only eat less than 1% of what is edible in the world. So as we look to the far future of how is humanity sustainable, we need to think different about what is food and what is nutritious and why we eat certain things. And I can tell you a cooked mealworm is like a little crispy topping. It is not like you're eating a bug. It is quite delicious, and he can prove it. So I think that next generation, being unafraid of being curious, is kind of cool. Do you want to go, Mary?
Well, I'll just say I'm very cheered by the fact that there are many new young farmers. Some of them are like people who want to start restaurants. They don't know what they're doing and they don't succeed. But there are many who are finding that lifestyle desirable, and they're making a commitment to care for the earth, and they believe it, and we should support them.
I want to add on to Mary's comments. Right now, the House and Senate, Ohio, is building the budget for the next 2 years. And there's something that is in it called House Bill 183, and it's a family farm tax credit for beginning farmers. So if say, you have a piece of land that you want to pass on to a beginning farmer, someone who is having a terrible time getting access to capital, access to land, the infrastructure needs. This House bill allows for an income tax credit for land, equipment, and outbuildings. So they're considering it now, so call your elected officials and let them know. It is bipartisan support. Ohio Farm Bureau and Farmers Union and OFA are all in support of this.
What I think they're starting to get right is what I hear young people talk right now. They're talking about, I'm looking at a label and seeing that, is this a cleaner label than it's been in the past? And no matter what they're buying, and some of that and some of where it comes from, but I really believe they're looking for cleaner, better products that are better for them. But they should just buy produce, right?
The outside of the shop.
Yeah, I agree with Mario. It's what they're doing right is they're paying attention. They're buying local food. I was fortunate to start my business when I did, and this whole local thing was just starting. It is, especially in light of these E. coli outbreaks, everybody's becoming more aware of it, and the younger people are getting it. And we see it. I sit next to Mario because we see it. We're looking at more items, developing items that are duplicates of what we can buy out west. And again, I say it again, but it's important to me. All that money follows back into our communities. And I'm not going to sit here and purvey to know the numbers, but I'm telling you, they're big numbers. When I got a kid that's buying a house or buying a car that's worked for me for 5 years, that means something. And it's a function of, they're going to the grocery store or restaurant, they're buying our products, and, that money's staying here instead of going out west. I mean, that's what they're doing right.
For me, I think that what the newest generations are getting right is not listening to us anymore, frankly. And I don't mean to contravene this question and turn it around, but I think that the point of this question is actually that we need to concern ourselves less with what the newer generations are doing now and what we aren't doing as the previously existing ones. We're not so old. Nobody in this room is past the point where they can't make more sustainable choices, where you can't make adjustments to how you eat out, to where you can't purchase better products. They're not just listening, and they're not just going, hey, we can make a difference. They're growing in an atmosphere that we created. They don't have a choice. They have to pursue more sustainable practices because of the buck we've passed for so long. So I think that the answer to this question is that we should let them have autonomy, and we should support them by pursuing practices while we're still out of the ground to give them a better context and the ability to move forward with their ideas and plans.
I want to thank our panelists so much for your time today. Thank you all. And thank all of you for having us here today to, I believe, start this conversation. I hope that in your own paths and in your own work, you can find ways to integrate some of these ideas and reach out to any of these folks for support. And have a great day. Thank you.